I'm the VP of Product Strategy and Compliance at Firely, and quality is important to me because I've done this my entire career. Before Firely, I worked on quality measure products, implementing them and designing them, delivering them to customers, and now I'm at Firely, and I do some of the same and also work on regulations and compliance. And with me, I have Evan.
Hi guys, my name's Evan. I'm an AVP at NCQA. I do everything digital there, so Fire, CQL, all that other stuff. So I'm operationalizing HEDIS on CQL. So naturally I have a vested interest in making sure that the whole world can execute the CQL products that I am currently building. And I think I have a couple of people from my org who are working on that CQL here today. So it would be great if their work product worked everywhere.
All right, so today we're going to learn about what is the DQIC, talk about the purposes, goals, objectives, the current members, how can you become a member, and then talk about our current and future projects. So this is a little verbatim here. The DQIC is a collaborative, consensus-based effort to develop advanced and standardized tools and platforms that make digital quality measurement possible. This was started last fall with a collaboration between NCQA and Levitt Partners, and they polled the community and asked who would like to be involved in improving digital quality. Our initial focus is going to be to help evolve clinical quality engines. So the idea here is that a lot of engines exist out in the world right now. They run CQL, clinical quality measures, clinical reasoning products, and we want to make sure that they all calculate the same way. We're also now and in the future developing tools to support other quality implementation type products. So what does the digital quality implementation community solve? So first and foremost, I think we've all recognized that CQL engines, they're variable and they're incomplete. So sometimes things have been created just to be for a specific reason, or like clinical reasoning, or for quality measures. And so what we want to do is help the implementers actually align that system. The second is consensus and clarity. There could be ambiguity in a specification. How do we implement this on these types of technologies, whether it be a language or a database? And this is a way that we can come together and try to help each other, find some consensus. Maybe it's a specification change, but it could be as simple as the best practice for this in this technology is to do it this way. And then why are we doing this? Well, we believe in actually improving quality, which can only be achieved through aligning the actual measurement accuracy. The idea of having a quality measure product calculate HEDIS differently is not palatable to anybody for quality. The goal here is to improve patient quality, so why would you have it such that one system will do it differently than the other? That doesn't really make any sense.
Well, in addition to just HEDIS, there's also the ECQM problem. So for example, when we developed our HEDIS tooling internally, we knew that the ECQMs that are being published by CMS and others, the subcontractors who work that contract, those ECQMs didn't work on our engine either. So while the MITRE engine, which was being used for the ECQM contract work for Maddie and Bonnie and those tools, those worked great for ECQMs, but that engine couldn't run HEDIS. And the engine I wrote for HEDIS could run HEDIS, but not ECQMs. And so we kind of realized pretty early on that CQL as an ecosystem will not survive if implementers cannot all create tooling that works on any valid CQL. So the environment that we've inherited, so to speak, at this point in 2024 is such that we have a normative spec that has been published for years. 1.5 has been out since 2020?
Yeah.
2019, maybe even earlier than that. Somebody in the audience might know when 1.5 went out, but it's been a long time. So it's a fairly settled spec, which has lots of tests, but no single engine actually implements all the tests. So there are edges of the spec where, the way I think of it is like a Venn diagram, where all the engines are, you put them in the diagram, the overlap area for all of what the engines can do is very large, but there's those slivers on the edges that all of them, this engine can do this, but not these other things. And we can't continue to invest in CQL in a world where you have to, as an implementer who wants to use these products, you shouldn't need to sit there and think, well, I'm a JavaScript-based system, so I'm going to use the JavaScript engine. Oh, but wait, that only works for ECQ. Like, we can't have that. We have to be able to instill confidence in the community that if you pull any CQL engine off the shelf and any CQL that you acquire from anybody, it should work. So that is what, in the nutshell, DQIC is about. The spec's great. HL7 does all that stuff. There's processes for that, and it's worked. But now we're at the implementation phase, and I think Ewout touched on that a little bit in his keynote about how implementation is very hard. Even if the standards are perfect, implementation is tough, thus the community.
And so how do you do that? Well, we need to have consensus on things like open infrastructure, tooling. So for example, we'll cover in a minute, we're creating like unit test frameworks, so that way any engine, whatever you be, Java, C#, you can hook up to this and make sure that the tests pass, or you can discuss consensus on what tests should we even have. And unless we come together as a community and bring in more people just like that want to improve the quality through these toolings, we will just have this disparate system across the industry. We'll also have, we have a collaborative space. So like we have Zulip, and we'll get into that a little bit more too. But this is a way to have your voice heard, to collaborate, to say, I have this issue, do you have this issue? That's not easy to do, maybe in this example that Evan was just giving, like, do you call HEDIS if HEDIS doesn't work? Well, sure, maybe you can call CMS, but what's the hotline? Now we kind of have a group where we can talk about these things and find the right people. Maybe it's a spec change, but maybe it's just an implementation issue. And then that goes into my next point. We can work on implementation challenges together. So, we're not all in an isolated box. We just have technology that might be different. So we're going to experience some of the same things, whether it be using SQL or Mongo, or whether it be C#, whatever it is. Oh, you're using Mongo too. Well, I had to go through this, trial and fixes. And that's a great way to not just like isolate your company, but to actually provide back to the community for digital quality. And then, of course, with what we all believe in, we're going to promote digital quality standards, and we also engage with regulation bodies like ONC, CMS you can see here, and the VA right now. So on the left you can see our non-member advisors. To my last point, and Levitt Partners is the facilitator for all of this membership. And here's our current members, in no particular order except alphabetical. And so every, couple weeks we get together, we get on a call, we talk about what is happening right now, what are the issues, but right now what we're focused on is sort of our next slides, which Evan will start to cover.
Thank you.
He's like, oh, I'm not ready.
Well, you were doing such a great job, Rich. I didn't want to steal your thunder. Okay, so I'll give you an example of one direct way in which DQIC has helped us directly. Unfortunately, some of my Google colleagues who are in this group could not make it to DevDays due to, well, reasons. But they are also developing CQL tooling at the moment, and we are currently embarked on the last leg of the journey that we're trying to do with CQL, which is to be able to convert CQL to Elm. So for those of you who are familiar with the CQL ecosystem, that's one of the steps involved. You take CQL, you turn it into ELM. ELM is a executable knowledge artifact representation. But as it turns out, converting CQL to ELM is actually quite tricky, because CQL is a functional language. It allows you to define functions, and you have to do things like overload matching, which is actually quite hard. So the spec that is published in normative has some documentation about how to do this. But it's pretty clear, and by Bryn's own admission, it was written sort of after the fact a little bit. They implemented it while they were writing the spec. So they made it work, and they're like, okay, let's document this. So that's a fundamentally different way of doing a spec than starting with only the spec and then trying to implement it. So as a result of this, the spec's a little bit incomplete in a couple of areas. And as such, both Google and I were trying to solve this problem, and we were just going back and forth constantly, talking to each other about, oh, how did you resolve this? How do you do this? Here's an example. What do you return when you do this? Do you match this overload? Do you match that overload? So we hooked up because we were both DQIC members. We were talking about the same problems at the same time. And the work product that we're going to produce as a result of this is we are taking extensive notes that we are going to propose as technical addendums to the specification going forward. So we're trying to create this feedback loop of here's what the spec says, here's what the implementers are trying to do, where are the gaps in the spec, let's go back to the spec, go through the HL7 process, ballot the technical update changes, you know, and all of that jazz. So that's one example of where we collaborate directly on these types of issues. And member orgs get to benefit from this collaboration because these are the things we talk about at meetings. Essentially, the way I like to describe it is it's sort of like an HL7 accelerator, but not quite as broad in scope. The DQIC doesn't even come close to the depth of something like DaVinci, for example, or Argonaut or something like that. And it's also not a standards focus, whereas the accelerators typically are. This is more about implementing a relatively narrow thing that is actually quite complicated, and therefore the problem rises to the need of having deeper collaboration than simpler problems might. So in a sense, it's similar to how Ewout and Nikolai were solving the schema problem at the same time. They got together, worked on implementation. The DQIC is a way to facilitate that type of collaboration for implementers.
Yeah, and HL7 is fully aware of our group, and we have representatives from HL7 on the team. So if there is a specification change or anything that's necessary, we just use the formal channels that already exist. So we're supplementing. We're not trying to take any of that over or anything like that.
Yeah.
So, you know, we've already submitted some things through Bryn. He said, great idea. It was part of his idea, of course. And then we just use that channel to correct some things.
Yep.
And in another example, just a quick one, you know, we're doing this test runner, which we'll show in a second. Not the tool itself, but just where it is. And I was like, well, it'd be better for my team if we had library evaluate versus $CQL. And very quickly the team was like, oh yeah, that would be good for us too. And so very quickly we moved on to now we have a PR and we're moving towards getting something done in that regard.
All right, so we started this group like last December, was it, guys? I think that's when we met in DC with Levitt at your offices, which are lovely, by the way, if you've never been. And so in that time, the first kind of couple of meetings we spent just establishing how we would communicate, how we would work together. Anytime you get a group of humans together, you got to go through, you know, basic processes. So we kind of agreed that we should still use Zulip as our main form of collaboration, typically just the CQL channel. The main reason for doing that was because we don't want to appear like we're a private club. We aren't. We want the world of CQL implementers to be aware of what we're doing. We're into transparency. This is not like a, you know, members only kind of club. So we decided to stick with Zulip since it already is the main channel for CQL. But we also established a little wiki. Is it on Confluence? Confluence?
There's a link to it later.
Yeah. Which we also use for meeting notes, that kind of stuff. So Bryn started working on a CQL test runner for us. And the reason that we started with that is because CQL as a specification comes equipped with something like 1,500 tests. And they're currently in the same format as the FirePath testing. It's an XML schema that has a test name and an expression. And the expression is something very atomic, like 2 + 2. CQL engine must return 4, but 2 + null must return null. It's like that kind of thing. Expression, expectation, so on. No engine today passes all of those tests. The engines that claim to only do so because they skip certain tests. Nobody actually does all of them as published in the specification test. So we decided that was a low-hanging fruit, right? If we can't even all agree that the specification tests are actually correct to the extent that we all agree to implement them and they all pass, then that's a little bit of an issue. So we started there. And so our idea behind creating a CQL test runner is that if you're just given this XML file and a couple of expressions and expectations, it means every single one of us who implements CQL has to implement a test runner to figure out how to take those XML files and deal with them. And that can be particularly challenging for engines that don't want to start with CQL to Elm, which we did not, right? So we needed Elm to execute. If you just gave us regular CQL, we had to convert it to Elm with Brin's tooling first, which I say Brin's tooling, it's the reference implementation of CQL to Elm written in Java. So just to clarify. I call it Brin's because he wrote it originally. So, but in any case, we had to invent how to do that. So we decided, all right, look, implementers should not need to implement how to parse this XML file and deal with the expectations and match the expectations, particularly because there's some nuance to that, because CQL is a language and it has an equals operator, and the equals operator has very specific semantics. So if you say 2 equals null, and your expectation is null, how do you represent that? How do you compare them correctly the CQL way? It's really tricky, actually. So we decided that we needed a universal test runner that everyone can use. And so the way we did that was by saying, look, if you're an implementer, which we all are, then all we have to do is implement the $CQL operation. It's a standard, which IG is that in? I forget. It's like the using CQL on fire IG, I think, right?
Yeah.
It used to be called the CPG IG, and then we renamed it. So, so this operation is defined there, and this operation is very simple. It's here's an expression, return the result. The test runner will take that result, compare it to what the expected value is in the XML, and tell you whether you pass. The reason this is nice is because we can host a test endpoint publicly, so that if you want to test one of our CQL expressions, any new test you want to propose, you can test it against anybody who publishes an endpoint that will do this. So this means that we haven't built it quite yet, but it's on the roadmap. We're going to have a nice little GitHub page that's going to show all these little green check marks of all the different engines. Does the Java engine, does the JavaScript engine, does the Firely engine, green check marks. And we're going to do it by facilitating this with the test runner. So that's the first main technical artifact we've done. We started testing this in the working group meeting in May. The Connect-a-thon on Saturday and Sunday was devoted to this. So we made a lot of progress testing the tool, altering it, and so on. And that's a taste of the kind of activities that DQIC is going to be doing going forward.
Yeah, and we envision a world where someone wants to just submit a new unit test because they've discovered something in their engine, and maybe you don't have to be a member or anything. The idea is that you've found a specification item, you're not sure how it works, you create a unit test, it works in your system, you submit it here, and the test runner will kick it off, and then maybe it's just green, right? And great. But if it's not, then we can take that conversation to the CQL chat in Zulip, discuss why it's not. Maybe the specification needs clarification. Maybe the software needs changing. Who knows? But it's a nice avenue to be able to bring those things together. You ready?
All right, so broadly speaking, by the end of the year, we are hoping that the specification tests as published will be completely adjudicated. We will go through all of them. We have already decided on certain tests that we intend on fixing. And some of the tests we plan on eliminating, and still others we plan on adding. So we want to refresh the specification tests to the extent that all the implementations that are out there today that are working on this may not all pass them quite yet, but we all at least agree that we will pass them. Whereas there are some tests today in the spec that some of us are looking like, okay, there's no way that ought to pass. That's the wrong answer. Here's the spec language that proves that it's wrong. And you may ask, well, how do we get to that point? Well, it's because we wrote these spec tests back for CQL 1.2, and we're on 1.5 now. Things have changed, and the spec tests they haven't all necessarily kept up to sync because nobody has gone through and reviewed them all systematically the way we are now doing it. So that's one of the main goals that we have for end of year. What we also want to do with the DQIC is start testing full libraries. The reason this is really important is because simple expression level tests are important because they're the foundation of everything. If you can't add 2 numbers, there's no way you're going to create a full library that involves adding days to ranges. Real libraries have all kinds of stuff. So if you're not confident that the atomic aspects of all your expressions are working correctly, then it's going to be really hard to figure out why a test is failing. So the current schema that we use for testing is not sufficient for that because it only really allows expressions. So how do you deal with multi-library tests where library A refers to library B and there's expressions in A that call into B? Does that work in your implementation? which is required by virtually every measure because everybody builds libraries. We can't test that with the current schema. So we've already begun creating a new schema that will solve that problem. Our friends from Google have done a lot of good thought work there. So we want to test full DQMs. So there's quite a few that are available publicly through the CMS contract work. So anybody who can log into Matt or Maddie or Bonnie or any of those tools can grab them. We want those to work, so we need to write some expectations. But also, as members of the DQIC, NCQA is offering an agreement to anybody who is part of the group with which, if you sign, we will allow you to acquire some of our HEDIS measures, which are normally intellectual property that you have to purchase, but we will give them to you gratis as long as you agree not to, sprinkle them around the world. So we're going to be giving away a couple HEDIS measures specifically to see if your engine can run them. So we're giving away, I think, lead screening in children, avoidance of, what is it? It's AAB. It's avoidance of antibiotics following acute bronchitis. It's a mouthful, but it's an event-based measure, so it's one of those ones where, you can be in the numerator twice in 1 year, so it's kind of interesting. And then we're giving you one with asthma medication ratio, AMR, which is very tricky because it requires data from medication that would not be in a value set, so we have to encode it in the measure itself. It's a mess. So it's tricky. So we want to see, if you can run this is very complex CQL, you could probably run any. So in addition to the measure itself, we are also giving away our certification test decks. So for any of you who are familiar with HEDIS, anybody who computes it for reporting has to be certified. And the way we certify you is by generating synthetic patients along with a score key that will tell you what populations they're in, numerator, denominator, and so on. So this means we have about 150,000 test patients for each one of these measures that we can throw at you. So hopefully that will accelerate people's ability to fix issues in their current implementations. And beyond that, we want to start defining tests for Elm translation. I gave that anecdote a minute ago about overload matching. There are no tests for that in the specification, but it's a major part of how to implement CQL. And lastly, we want to start creating test suites for implementation guides beyond just the CQL spec. So there is a using CQL on Fire IG, which bridges the gap on how you actually use CQL with Fire. Because in case you guys are unaware that CQL can be used with other data models other than just Fire, in fact, most CQL today is targeting QRDA, or Quick, I believe it's called in the data model, but most CQL is non-Fire at the moment. That's being changed slowly, but we would like to actually have tests that specifically test the Fire model as used in CQL, because there's actually issues in the model for CQL that have never been tested. They're wrong. You look at them and you're like, okay, that's not the property you used to match the patient, but it's, no one's ever tested it. So that's part of the task as well. And when we go through this process, we are going to find a whole lot of specification gaps. Just text missing, clarification needed, that kind of thing. Technical corrections largely. So we want to loop back to that process. And there is talk among the group. We've had a couple of meetings where the meeting has kind of devolved into a wish list of things we wish CQL had, like the group by operator, for example. So we might end up kind of influencing the CQL standard to include some things that the implementers really, really, really wish we had, but that may not happen this year. We'll see.
So if you want to get involved, how do you get involved? Well, I'll have Mark here for a second come up and just tell us a little bit about that. The idea is that you can be involved as a member if you have reasons, like your own engine, but you don't have to be, but I'll let Mark talk about it.
Yeah, so I'm Mark Marcianti from Levitt Partners. We're facilitating the DQIC. Just so everybody's kind of aware, everything, as that they said earlier, is 100% correct. If there's something related to the spec itself, Bryn's a part of our work group. He helps to work that through. We have observers from the government, CMS, ONC, VA, that are helping us to make sure that we're not out there. We are very serious about antitrust, ensuring that there's no advantage for being part or not part. We want to make sure that this is completely on the up and up. So, as you become a member of the DQIC, there are agreements that go with that. However, all of the output of the DQIC is fully open in the Atlassian, if it's not part of CQL, if it's not part of the HL7 spec itself, or it's in the GitHub repositories that were mentioned here, the CQL tests and CQL test runner. Those are adjacent to HL7 spec, so they're updated outside of the ballot because they're not part of the actual ballot. And then anything that's part of the spec or increasing documentation that's needed, we'll put that through the ballot, and Bryn will help us with that. The best way to get involved, you can go to the Atlassian page there. You can talk to me, or Mark Roberts, who's my counterpart here. He runs, most of you probably know Mark if you've been here for any period of time. He's kind of the rock star from Levitt Partners at the Karen Alliance. Or I mean, you could talk to Amal. Amal can get my name out there, or these guys, they can get you to me. There is a page on the Atlassian for interest, so you can put it out there. But as I mentioned, the membership is mostly just contact me. We'll have a short meeting to talk about it. We have a boilerplate language. Levitt Partners does alliances. This is what we do across the board. So we've got a very lightweight subscription-based model that's based on your particular organization's size and other factors. So it's usually just a short meeting, then a very easy contracting process, which your lawyers can look at, and has been vetted by several. So,
Thank you, Mark.
Thanks, Mark.
So I mean, yeah, if you're doing anything with CQL technology of any kind, whether you are a implementer of tooling or an implementer of using other people's tooling to implement a digital quality pipeline, for example, in your organization, if you're doing anything with digital measures, you should hook up with us and get involved, because we want to make sure that all the effort we're spending on digital measures, both from a standards perspective and from a creating of the content itself perspective, that effort will not go anywhere if people can't actually use them. So this is the place to be. This is where all of the thought leaders on CQL technology that we're aware of in the world currently are. So if you are one of those people and you're not part of DQIC, we'd love to have you.
So I don't need to read the summary slide, but we did try to convince you to join at the end there.
I hope so.
And here's some contact information. It's all on these slides in Whova. And what I was going to do is during questions, just throw up some of these links so you can at least see these websites once. Let me get out of this. So we'll take questions now. Why won't this close?
Is CMS aware of DQIC? And if so, what is the relationship?
Is who?
CMS.
yes, they're observers. They come to every meeting.
How do I get back to this?
Sorry.
Yes, CMS and ONC, as well as the VA, are all observers. They're part of the DQIC virtually. I mean, they're not decision makers. They're observers that help us. And they're very well aware and very supportive of what we're trying to do.
I'm personally very proud of the work my team at NCQA has done for HEDIS, but CMS is definitely the big fish in the content production world. The amount of money and time and resources they put into producing DQMs written in CQL dwarfs what NCQA does. And so without their sort of sponsorship over how CQL and digital measures are evolving, we would be a bit lost. So yes, CMS is a critical partner. They don't come to every single meeting, but they do when they can. So we're in constant contact with them.
Now that there's an official project that's going into balloting in January, we expect that CMS will likely make changes to their, once the CQL has been successfully tested across several engines and we have the test cases, we have the test results, we have the test runner, there's every indication we have to believe that CMS will also begin to move into this realm.
Making me look bad. Don't tell my own president what's happening.
So here's a question of conscience, and I'm not sure who's going to respond, but we have this the thing in the hallway with the Gardner hike cycle where you do the push pin, right? Whereas fire in the where would you push your pin for CQL?
What are the options?
So it's the hype, going up the hype, and then there's the trough of disillusion, and then there's the enlightenment, and then you have the plateau of productivity.
Depends on who you ask. Where would I?
Well, I'm asking you.
It's a tough question. I think we are climbing out of disillusionment. I've heard a lot of criticism over CQL in the last couple of years. Mainly, a lot of the questions that I get when I tell people, oh yeah, I work at NCQA, I'm turning HEDIS into CQL, they look at me, why CQL? And usually that's followed with, how come you didn't choose to do it in my personal stack that I use at my company so that it would be easier for me? I've gotten, why didn't you just do it in Python? Like hundreds of times. Everybody wants us to do this in Python for some reason. Because Python is popular now. But for anybody who has been in tech for a long time, Python was not popular 10 years ago, and who knows where it will be 10 years from now. So there are reasons that CQL exists that I think most of the people in the community know and appreciate, but the broader community, there's a lot of folks that don't quite get it. But part of the reason that we're not quite in the enlightenment part of the curve is because, in the hype cycle, the promises lead to huge hype. Then the promises have asterisks like, yeah, it's a beautiful new day, except there's no engines that actually do it all, right? There's the tail, right? So then you get into this trough of disillusionment where you've been oversold. But I think the DQIC's point is to try to get us back out of that trough where we're going to make good on these promises. All the pieces were in place. It's just a matter of getting the work done. And it's hard work to implement a language. So I think we're coming out of the disillusionment cycle, I hope. And that's one of the things that DQIC is going to try to address. One of my personal interests at these conferences is to proselytize digital health, and part of that is digital quality measurement. So if enough people hear the message, then they will begin to appreciate why we have CQL in the first place. Because as it turns out, quality measurement is not so easy. It's a hard vocabulary, and it's hard to express in any programming language, especially ones that are not purpose-built for this. It's possible, of course, but it's tricky. So what about you, Rich? What do you think? You agree?
Yes, and not because that's the easy answer. I've seen what it looked like before it was on fire, before it was quite CQL. There was a thing that was before that, and it just didn't work well. And now that we have a machine-readable language to translate this into an actual quality measure, and I also take my cues from the U.S. government quite often, having sit in a regulatory position, I see that we're legislating this now. The DQMs isn't quite there. It's in some of the MIPS regulations, but there's RFPs to make this move forward in digital quality measurement for CMS. This all tells me that we're coming out of that disillusionment phase, and we can't use what was there before. This is the best that we've created so far, and now the government's interested. And we went to NCQA and had a summit, and everybody's talking about this stuff. So we're coming right out of there. I'm excited about it, and I mean, I couldn't be more excited about it, to be honest, because it's better than anything we've ever seen before.
You had a question?
Is it going to be in the DQIC purview to also put in more like training material and possible approaches on how to tackle a particular problem. For instance, like I have a team of developers, but a lot of time, like you can't find solutions on the web, like on Stack Overflow or Google, like how to approach a particular problem in CQL as much as you would find in Python or Java or JavaScript, for instance.
It's an excellent idea. This is why we need your voice in the DQIC, right?
That's the reason we created the Confluence outside of HL7, outside of everything else, for exactly that. It's not mature yet, because we're still in the beginning part, but we want our members to be contributing those best practices. Seeing how Zulu checks, is there documentation on this? And the immediate thought we have is, immediate thought I have is, not yet, but we can put it in there. And since it's not part of the specs,
9 a.m. tomorrow. 9 a.m. tomorrow.
it's not part of, because it's just how to use something, it's a guidance document.
Yeah.
And since there was no central place, now there is.
So I'll jump into, I'm teaching a class on how to use the take CQL, move it through the .NET SDK, all the way to actually running it tomorrow at 9 a.m. And there'll be a presentation at 9, and then the next day, I forget the time for this, but there's hands-on. So there's an actual C# implementation of how to use this stuff. There's also the Java tooling, which you can look at. So that's a way of looking at, we haven't done this. This existed before the DQIC, but those are examples of how you can get that, and maybe you wouldn't know about it unless we said it here today.
So considering CQL is going to play a pretty significant role in DaVinci DDR, I'm just going, is there any concerns with this being ready? I know this is quality measure focused, but obviously, I just wonder if the same kind of issues that we're facing here with engines being kind of different in what they do, this is going to be concerned with DaVinci DDR getting that ready by, I think, 2027.
What's the program that you're referencing?
The burden reduction, CRDD, CRDD.
Oh, yeah. I don't really want to comment on this, to be honest. There's still talk about whether or not that actually is necessary because of how small it is. So, will it be ready? I mean, I can run CQL right now, and I haven't put it in Firely Server, for example, in that section of where it gets run. But I think there's like a lot of rules that go on in the pairs that they're saying, I don't know that we can translate all our rules to the CQL stuff. So I'm skeptical that it's actually going to get done in that way. Maybe there's something more simple. That's my opinion, though.
We've had conversations in the May Connectathon, the DaVinci group, and we both met with Bryn. It's going to be part of our ticketing or whatever to consider it. But I mean, as you know, from DTR itself is heavily based on rules. And so first of all, you have to define the rules in an automated way. Once you define the rules in an automated way, then you have to put it into CQL. So that's the big question. I don't know, there will not be a technical reason it won't be ready because all the tests will run, all of the specs will be updated, but will the actual rules be there is I think it's an open question.
So with the DQM strategy, is there a future state roadmap? As I heard 2030 was when they kind of wanted to try to convert, I think, ECQMs to DQMs, but what is the practical, or what is the reality with that?
I don't know the date. Do you know the date? But they're actively working on digital quality measures, converting the DQM to Fire-based CQL. There's GitHub repositories we check all the time, and actually, if you check out the .NET SDK, we have a copy of them in there for testing. There was a 2025 timeline, and I'm not sure where that's been now.
So CMS is spending a lot of money paying measure developers to convert existing QRDA measures into Fire, to create new Fire-based CQL measures, and ZQA is a subcontractor on that contract, and there's a bunch of other folks here from other companies that are also involved in that effort in some way, shape, or form. For NCQA's perspective, we have already converted 100% of HEDIS to CQL, and it runs in a certified way, which, again, for those of you who know HEDIS, being certified is a big deal. So our CQL tests pass all the same certification requirements that any engine would. So it's real. I have no idea what the CMS regulatory requirement for reporting and submitting, incentive programs for things like that.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to. I don't know.
I don't know what that timeline is. It shifts a lot, so it's hard to say. I've heard 2030 as well, so that sounds accurate. I can tell you the work is currently underway and is being funded. This isn't like, a proposal. It's real. Mal, do you want to chime in?
Oh, we got one in the back.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Just kind of follow up on that. So the initiative, I believe you're talking about is the meaningful measures, which was pushed from 2025 to 2030. The work that DQIC is doing will be an enabler for that and other DQM initiatives, because this work is going to fuel the digital quality transition. Transition from paper-based or non-FHIR approaches to using FHIR data model and CQL as part of the transition. And what this does is basically ensures that there is an infrastructure layer, which is CQL engines, that provides choice and confidence to the community. And I think we definitely, with the federal government doubling down on FHIR and CQL, I think this is definitely going to push the needle on realizing that goal. 2030. Let's shoot for that, and hopefully we'll get there. But that's the idea behind DQIC.
Thank you, Amal.
I have a question regarding companies who want. I'm here. Companies who wanted to establish a pipeline for running the digital measures. Do we have a plan on publishing the CQL engine as a NuGet package?
So the engine that we use for HEDIS was open source last year as the Firely CQL SDK, which is currently on NuGet. You can, with that SDK, if you like, you can compile CQL measures to NuGet packages and deploy them that way, if you like. Rich will be showing that tomorrow morning, how to do that. He won't go all the way to the NuGet package step, but he will show you the basic
We'll make a
pieces
library.
involved. Yeah, so I guess short answer is yes. Other engines have other techniques for doing this, but there's an entire IG called the CRMI IG, which is about canonical resource management I. I don't know what the I stands for, but it's entirely about how to publish and share CQL artifacts, and then how engines who can consume these published artifacts can operate. I can't speak to what Smile's strategy is on this, but I know they have a plan. They're working hard on that, and I don't know where JavaScript is at this point. Those are the 3 engines that are currently open source that I'm aware of. There might be others. Do you know of any others?
Well,
Open source currently?
not that it matters which source you use, but everything becomes a FHIR library for using FHIR. So you just have a set of FHIR libraries, and everything's in there, your ELM, your CQL, and in the case of the .NET, we have the C# library, DLL. So that's how and then you would package that up and ship it out.
If you guys are .NET centric, you can hook up with us after the talk, and we'll talk .NET stuff.
Yeah.
That's
Any
open to
more?
everybody, by the way.
Last question, anyone? Guess not.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.